get involved in your community. Statistically, your community is the one that's going to help you find your next role. It's not us, statistically. Find your own community, find your own tribe, so to speak, and make sure that you're sharing your experiences with them. You're listening to others, you're helping others. There's no other place in the world is there a market where, or an industry where people share as much against potentially a common enemy. Work on your stories. Your storytelling, if CISOs could benefit from learning their stories, it will definitely come back in a positive manner. If you don't get your stories, the same thing happens as, the same negative things could happen. If you're not interested in telling stories, you're probably going to run into some challenges.
Michael Piacente, hey, thanks for making some time for me today.
Love it. Great to be here.
I know this is round 2 for us. We tried to do this face-to-face, and I've done 4 face-to-face, and they've all failed, and it was completely my ignorance, inability to do any sort of face-to-face recording confidently at this point, which that's my apologies, and thanks for joining back.
Well, it wasn't all bad. I got to hang out with you at a brewery for a couple hours, and you're bound for success, as they say. There's nowhere to go than up from here. So
you are too kind. So, Michael, you're the managing partner and co-founder of Hitch Partners, the preeminent CISO-focused executive search firm. You have an unusual origin story, studied history of University of Delaware and spent a decade of IT practitioner, including co-founder OpSource and others. And I know we're going to talk about, hey, where do we need to have innovation in the recruiting process? What do companies hire for? What do they know, not know? Advice to security leaders going into roles. I know we're going to hit that. What I really would love to start is really your origin story, because you've done a bunch of different things, and it's fascinating to really set context to your points of view on how you see things.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we're still striving to be the preeminent, by the way. I think you might have added that in there, but we just hope we're helping the community, so we're thankful for that. Yeah, it's been an interesting story for me, and I actually I'm a big believer that things happen for a reason, and that's kind of where this all kind of comes together. But yeah, I started my career moving out to the West Coast as a young dumb kid, learning technology, and I'm just an old dumb adult. But basically, I started with this really unique company. I was a good family friend brought me into the company. They were in the enterprise storage space. It's a company called MTI, and this company was really unique because they were building storage subsystems for the VAX world. So they weren't in the IBM side of the house; they were in the VMS side, and they actually had these brilliant computer scientists out of University of Illinois that actually created the original RAID patents. I think there were 34 of them, if I'm not mistaken. And so they leveraged those RAID patents in exchange with DEC and eventually with EMC. But with DEC first, they basically leveraged them and said, "Yeah, we'll give you the rights to these patents in exchange for being able to attach our subsystems onto your proprietary bus architecture." So for the whole time I was 7 years plus, they were the only company in the world that could attach and actually work with source code on a VAX, 6200s, the Alpha 2100s, and so what that created was this really unique differentiator in the market to go to these big companies who, by the way, didn't like the DEC storage and hated it actually, and they're like, we love this kind of very, very thin layer of technology and some of the GUI behind it, and so it's really cool to work with some of these original folks. And I got to work at this thing called the RAID Technology Center in Sunnyvale. And by the way, the company's chairman was Ray Norda from Novell. Right, so there was some heavy hitters with this company, and they were a great sales team. They had a great sales team, so it was a really fun way to start my background. And then from there, a lot of those folks left, and they got into the managed services business, being the smart hands eventually for data centers. And then that kind of brought me to my journey, my next phase, where I went into the data center infrastructure world and ran teams that were basically, input at the data centers. Is before the automation world. So this is the follow the sun kind of stuff. Websites were just coming out, and really cool time to look at technology. And then got into, I was traveling all over, basically following the sun, as I mentioned. And I think we were responsible for about 21 data centers. And then I got into executive recruiting, and I had another friend that was starting a executive search firm and a contract firm for finance and accounting. And he was trying to start an IT practice. This is around the times of Sarbanes-Oxley coming out, so post 9/11, 2001, 2002. And I got to kind of see this rise of what we would, as initially as CIOs and the CIO level. So I got to see the rise of this modern CIO, and eventually now, which I'll get to in a moment, but the rise of the modern CISO. And I got to see the convergence or the divergence from security and IT, and then full circle to now the convergence of security and IT and tech ops and everything. And so it's really funny. I mean, the background, like I said, it happened for a reason, but I got to a little bit of a historical placement of watching, high-end data being used for the first time in open systems, and then that consolidating into storage area networks, consolidating into what will eventually become the cloud, and then now getting into what we would see the modern CISO piece, and that all started when I was doing security. I was doing CIO searches, and we were getting calls. One in particular in the Bay Area, where a very well-known software company CEO called and said, "We need a CIO." And I'm like, "Great. Is it an ERP implementation, data center consolidation? Like, what's going on?" And they're like, "Nope. We lost control of our software licensing costs." And I was like, "Que pasa?" Like, what does that mean? And turns out what happened, this company had many, many engineering teams, and those engineers would go out and they use this really cool thing called AWS, very, very early on. And they'd say, "We don't know what's in these buckets. We don't know these S3 buckets. We don't know what's out there. And we need someone to come in and kind of rally back the cost of this, because there's a shadow IT thing being created. And we're just worried not so much about the control, but about the cost." And I'm like, "Okay, I get that. But isn't this your code? Isn't this your product code that you're launching like next year, or this like very, very prominent company?" And they're like, "Yeah, but AWS has these configurators, and you just put an administrator in charge of it, and everything is hunky dory." And I'm like, "Cool, but I don't really think that's as easy as it sounds."
How it works.
It's not how it works. And I didn't know anything, right? But I knew enough to call a friend of mine who is my business partner now, Brett, and I say, like, "I have this idea. I think what's happening here is you're looking at something that IT can no longer handle, this concept of moving from availability to business enablement. This business enablement thing that they're doing has nothing to do with something that is in their scope. What they need is someone that is now, we call AppSec and ProdSec, and they need someone that can speak engineer, someone that can speak software development." And that's where we started Hitch Partners, to focus on that thin layer at the time of people that really understood how products were being built in the modern sense and protecting them. And then there's all the other compliance and IT security piece was still going up and to the right, but this other thin layer was clearly, I actually thought by like 2017, 18, that everyone would be running cloud. There'd be no such thing as an IT security person. Clearly I'm wrong. So don't ever listen to my advice. But, now we're approaching this thing that's like to 2026. It's like a Chief Information Product Technology Risk Security AI Officer, right? That's the title. Damn it.
The kitchen sink.
That's the title. Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like my background was sort of set me up for this kind of moment in history, and it's really fun. I'm having fun. If I could only, I think we talked about this last time, if I could only figure out how to speak with my kids, my teenagers, because they have a totally different language. That's, I can speak the language of CISO. I can't speak the language of teenagers. So,
well, if you figure that out, I think we're both in the same camp on that one.
Yes, exactly.
Kids are great, but I think it's generational. And so we've all gone through it in relation to the next generation. But the same thing with, to your point, same thing with the roles. The role of the security leader and the CIO as well has changed over these years. And as a result of that, not just the language, but the language is a byproduct of the tasks that they've been given and the technologies and the complexity and the environments. And, how do you get more technically enabling the business, and how do you also get more business oriented and understand go to market and funnels and conversion rates and these non-domain specific things like security domain specific things. Was that the takeaway going back to the CIO kind of evolution?
Yeah,
because that was a big evolution.
It was. When I started recruiting, first of all, I didn't know anything about recruiting. I never did recruiting other than hiring and firing people on my own team, other people. So that doesn't really give me the MBA and know how to do this. So, but when I started, it was really for this IT executive, the CIO, the business apps leader, the infrastructure leader, the PMO leader, all these terms you kind of don't hear that much anymore. But the evolution was about growing these transactional leaders in IT into business leaders, right? The business systems analyst, right? Remember that position? Yep. And the PMO, they would eventually, that group became CIOs, right? They knew the business. They were coming from finance and FinOps and HRIS and CRM, right? Like Salesforce kind of exploded the world when that all came back. Supply chain management. It made sense. The modern CISO was transitioning from availability to business enablement. And that's kind of true today, right? I'm a history major, so I look at the cycles of history. And so the CISO is moving away from securing just all the different components to enabling the business. And right now, no more important right now than is enabling the velocity of adoption in AI. It's no longer like, can you secure the environment? It doesn't matter whether you can secure it. The question is, can you enable it? Can you enable those business leaders? So like you take your finance team is like, we just implemented an AI tool last week that gave us 25%, more productivity. Are you really going to go talk to that and be like, oh, sorry, the guardrails weren't this, we're going to take that away? It's like, hell no. You're going to basically try to figure out how you're going to, like a CIO did. I always tell CISOs this. I'm like, CIOs have a lot to teach here because they went through this, not at the same velocity. I would agree. Yeah. Technology is moving much faster, but the complexity of how to speak to the business and enable them to use the tools. They had a little bit more time then. SaaS was still developing. Now it's like, I call it like instantaneous intelligence from these businesses. Like they could just be like, I'm an expert right now. I'm an expert. But build me a guardrail that keeps us safe, keeps the company compliant. But the technology is coming much more rapidly right now. So I do think there's a lot of parallels. Look, the CISO is an influencer role. Up until recently, they really always had smaller teams, very efficient teams, but they managed smaller organizations with a huge remit, whereas the CIO had much larger teams. It's a different world. We built companies differently back then. The CISO is also communicating much earlier in their journey with the executive leadership team, with the board, much faster than the CIO ever did. When we first started the company, Hitch Partners, that is, we started doing our survey. And in the first couple of years, it was like less than 9% were reporting to the board. And we're about to launch, probably by the time this comes out, we'll be released our next gen report, and it's over 74% of people either reporting quarterly or at least half a year. It was closer to 80%. And so,
and maybe using that, maybe hitting on, because you've done that for a couple of years. What is that transition of, since you've been doing that survey, whether it's from, not just from a compensation, of course, that's one component of that survey, but really role and responsibilities, industry verticals, and any notable takeaways that kind of relate into this transformation of the security leader role?
Yeah, first of all, the background of the survey was when we started, back to my original story, when we started looking at these, now it's common, AppSec and ProdSec, flavored CISOs. Yeah. But when we first started, people were like, you're crazy. That's never going to catch on. Like, that's just going to be a very small cottage industry, right? And we're like, nope. We believe this is going to be the CISO of the future. In fact, in the next 5 years, like I said, by 2018, there'd be, and so that was wrong. But right now, 2026, you look at where AI is, the baseline of AI is product security, right? If you don't understand how to secure AI, it's probably because you weren't a ProdSec or AppSec, super powered person at one point or another. And so I would say that the scope, so when we first started doing the survey, it was because we did not have any data around compensation for these individuals. And so we had to go find them and say, how much are you making? How are you getting paid? And we found that we're like, whoa, these guys are way, way off the charts compared to your run of the mill, Radford CISO, right? And like, we're talking like over 100% off, like not even close, not 30% off, not 40%, like 100 to 200%. Some of these individuals, not even CISOs, but like directors, where the average was like 200. I remember the number 242,000 was like the average when I first got. I mean, these people are making 800,000-900,000, in the post.com, beginning of SaaS companies. And so, we're like, well, we got to get more data out there. This is, every time we get a candidate to the table for an offer, it's just an embarrassment when the client comes back, and we're trying to educate them, by the way, with no data. So we had to go get the data. Selfishly, we needed the data. And then as we started doing more and more searches, and the organization started catching up with this trend, then the comp has always been primary. It's the first thing that we cover. But over the years, and we're going on our 9th year, we've actually done it for 10 years, but 9 years where we've actually released it. Now it's just as much on the trending data. So I think there's like 16 questions around how AI is used in the environment today, because that's what CISOs wanted to hear. So basically our survey is, tell us what you want to hear. We're going to go get all the data, and then we're literally regurgitate it back with you without any filter. We're going to put it in cool charts so that it looks professional enough. And then you guys use it as your tool when you're negotiating. VCs use it, analysts use it. It's really humbling to see where it's become. But we basically built it for selfish reasons because we did not have the data. So that's why we did it. Yeah.
And so how does that? Because you just touched on the current expectations of the company that is hiring security leaders and teams or otherwise. So my question is, today, how do companies see the CISO role or the security function? Are they educated enough to understand it, to kind of drive that role definition, to know what they want? Or is it, I think I need something in this space, just give me a body?
The answer is 80+% of the people or the companies that approach us really don't know exactly what they're looking for. And that's okay, because it is confusing, and there's a lot of voices chirping saying, I need this, I need this. I think our job is to codify that for them. We have a process, we call it interviewing the interviewers. People are probably sick of me talking about it, but it works really well. And that is, we literally interview all the executives in the company who are going to be on the interview committee, and even some that aren't going to be on the committee, and just say, like, what does it mean to you? What does success look like? How are you looking at today? What are you doing today? How are you planning on getting there? And so what we learn is the sort of intelligence level, maturity level, poverty level of that the company's thinking, because there is the security poverty line is a real thing, right?
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, on one hand, you have technology forward companies that are using security to drive value in their business. They're using security to drive, it's a priority because it's going to make the company more efficient, more valuable, more sales. And then there's some that are just using security to say that they're compliant. And at some point, when you have to go hire someone that looks like you, right? Someone that can build an enterprise, but also is super technical, has the product security understanding, can, that kind of chameleon, so to speak. And you're like, that person is going to be in the $2 to $3 million range in annual compensation, that they just fall off their chair because they were thinking they're going to pay something different. We're like, that's essentially, I'm not saying that that's the security poverty line, but there's more broader examples of that, of the companies that can go afford exactly what they think they want, and those who are like, actually, we're thinking about this differently. We just need someone that can get us the baseline. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a business strategy. I'm not here to tell people they shouldn't do that. But Either way is a business strategy. If you don't want to spend the time, there's plenty of companies out there that have went down the road of investing millions of dollars on their security program, only to pull back later and consolidate, and then that CISO or team is, on the market looking for a role. And there's also a lot of companies that hadn't invested at all, and it worked out until it didn't work out, and the compliance, and so now they're paying for it literally, dearly right now. They go hire Mandiant to fix everything, and Mandiant's like, there's nothing here, right? You didn't have anything to, so good for them. But yeah, so there's arguments on both sides. I'm not sitting here telling people they should go invest millions of dollars. If it doesn't make sense for your business, it doesn't make sense for your business. But that's a business decision.
From a compensation standpoint, that makes a lot of sense. From a role and responsibility, so for example, I look at those roles that, hey, there's a need because I'm going to push in change. I need to change the processes to include security. I need to implement technology. I need to get funding for these things. But you're really an agent change, getting from a point to a more healthier point.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean, at least in my experience, that all of the hiring manager or companies or C-suite is aware of that change that is needed or what that impact looks like on those processes, budget wise or others. Is that what you see from your vantage point, or is it different?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, there's a very big gap between budget readiness and true readiness, right? I mean, funding wise, over 70% of the CISO or the cybersecurity budgets we're seeing now are dedicated to AI driven initiatives, right? Fraud prevention, identity, automating their SOCs. The reality is they're actually spending less than 10% on the advanced security pieces, the AI agents and how they're actually implementing it. And so that's what we're seeing. When we go into a company and dissect what actually they built to this point, they're looking for that to increase that bottom 10% to something much larger, right? And it still remains, security still remains in the top 3, budget priorities at all time, right? It's how they're using that. And I will say, when we talk to a lot of executives, and these are pretty modern executives that, come from modern product environments, and they still have this kind of antiquated view of what a CISO does and what a CISO's program does. And it takes a lot of calibration and to no credit to their own. It's not a problem for them. It's just to understand it, excuse me. It's just that the scope when we first started this journey is almost unrecognizable, right? The CISO does so many things at one time, they're a strategic leader, they're an operation leader, they're a sales velocity leader, they're a compliance leader, they're a board level leader, they're an advisor, they're the technical, Justin's the guy that's just going to solve the big problems in the company. And by the way, he's so good at that, then here's this problem with IT, or here's this problem with trust, with physical security. I think CISO, the modern CISO we see at least, has become such a valuable resource in the company that they're like almost the foregone conclusion of you're the one that can solve the big problems in the company. And one of the things that's really cool in our survey that we're excited to get out there is it just did this data. Companies that are sitting between 5,000 employees and 10,000 employees have nearly twice the size of the teams of any other security, their whole team, whatever that team comprises of, than any other category. And we looked at that, we're like, this data can't be right. Why that? It turns out that those companies are also the most probable to go through either an acquisition spree or an IPO, even smaller, 2,000 person, but the teams blowed up for a while and then they level out when you get up to over 10,000. And so the reason is at that moment in time, the company is hiring someone that is a problem solver collector, and they've added IT, they've added technical operations, the SRE team, all these other teams during that period of time. And then when they're smaller, they didn't have to think about it. Or they didn't really think about it. When they're larger, then they start bifurcating and going and getting all these different people. It's really fascinating to watch the trend. It's like the company gets bloated and then they go get like the one, like I wasn't joking, the chief information product, AI, all this stuff, whatever. Yeah. And they get that for a period of time and then they outgrow it. And then eventually they get a true CIO if they didn't already have one. So this is actually a really interesting trend we saw.
Yeah. So when you, going back to something that you mentioned, the way you interview the interviewer is really to kind of figure out the real need. I'm putting words in your mouth. You tell me if you agree or disagree, but you're really looking to tease out the specificity of the persona, the security leader persona that they want to hire, but they just don't know. And I'm sure there's a reflecting back of what you heard that really educates that that hiring manager or team, because it's really a cast of thousands, so to speak, that really need to get a point of view on this person. One, is that correct? And then two, what is the usual, persona that at the end of the day, maybe there's 2 or 3 general personas of the CISO that it ends up with? And then the third question is, how do they respond?
Yeah, great questions. So first of all, yes, you're accurate and probably have better words to describe it than I did. We started interviewing the interviewers as a funny story. When I first started recruiting for this, and that original company that was doing the finance and accounting teams, we went to this company, small company in pharmaceutical, it was a life sciences company in Mountain View. It was like maybe a couple hundred people, and they had a really cool product, and they were about to go to market with it. The CFO hired us to bring in a CIO. Wasn't even really a CIO. It was like a head of business apps. And so we all left. We all went there together. I kind of did my little spiel on the IT side of, recruiting, and this is what we're going to do. And then we all left. And then that was like on Monday. And like on Thursday, my boss calls and was like, hey, where the hell are you? I'm like, oh, I'm at the client. I'm like interviewing everyone. I'm doing all this. He's like, no, that's not how you do it. You hear them, you come back to the office, you make a boatload of phone calls, and you figure out, and then you get the resume. And from like, again, I'm an IT guy. I was trying to figure out the problem from inside, right? And that was the only way I knew how to do it. I think cell phones were just being a thing right there. And I just said, this doesn't feel right to me. And that was kind of the birth of interviewing the interviewers, because that was the only way I knew how to. So it takes a long time. But the reason why we do it is 3 things. One, we need to understand the inner workings of the company, where all the bodies are buried, all the technology, where's the technical debt, where's the relationships, how did these folks all get there together? Have they succeeded? Have they failed together? Like, where are they? And knowing their company pitch and their company history, not just what I can read, but what I can feel, right? And the urgency. And then the other thing is, we understand how deeply do they know the world of security, because the people we're going to put in front of them do not play, right? They're not going to sit there and explain security 101 to these folks. They need them to be ready. We need them to be ready to interview, right? We need them to be ready to sell to these candidates. This is a candidate's market, right? This is not a client's market. I don't know how many times I got to say that publicly. Like, you want a top level CISO? Don't come to me and be like, oh, what are your 10 candidates that you want? Like, no, it's the other way around. Like, you tell us what you have to offer, and I'll tell you if those 10 candidates are interested. It's like I'm not making up the rules here. This is just the way it is. I'm sure it's like that on engineering and product and other. I'm sure it's not super special in security. But and then the third thing is, we want to find out who the good interviewers are and who needs help. Right? Interviewers, not interview, because what we find is a CISO, interviewing a CISO, CISOs have their own challenges interviewing, but most of them are curiosity majors, and they're professional risk mitigators. So if you come at them with a story and it's blah, blah, and this and that, and it's not deep, and it's not heartfelt, and it's not genuine, they're going to sniff that out really, really quickly. And so we want to understand, okay, who goes first, who goes second, who's selling. So that's why we do it. It's really quite fascinating. And then we summarize it, we bring it back to the CEO or whoever our main contact is, and we say, okay, here's what we heard, and this is what calibrates to what you told us in the beginning. And a lot of times it's not calibrated, so we have to go through that exercise. But I'd say the 3 things that come up is, are they looking for a gatekeeper? Are they looking for a platform or orchestrator? Or they're looking for what we call the digital janitor, right? So, it's like someone that's just going to clean up their mess and just be out of sight, out of mind, and maybe add some value here and there. Okay, fine. Not a search really I want to look at, if they're looking for a performance architect, someone that actually is going to put and is going to shake things up, or they're looking, someone that's going to orchestrate that, or they're looking for a gatekeeper that's just there for compliance reasons and we're going to do the minimum. We need to understand that certain searches we just won't go out to market with, frankly, because I need you all to call me back as CISOs, and I'm only going to, I may have small volume, but I want to bring you the best possible searches that we could think of. And we've curated our own searches. We've given up lots of business. There's plenty of great search firms that'll go do those. Doesn't mean it's going to be us. So I think the themes are that these companies really do feel like security is going to be a point of differentiation. No more in history have I ever seen that than right now. Like going into 2026 is how will this company's view of AI and how they're building AI, if it's an AI native company, like how is security? That's the one thing that could destroy them before they even lift off is security, lack of security.
You hit three personas. I'll just kind of echo it back. You had the janitor, just clean up the garbage. I've seen those roles. That resonates quite well. But the other two is, hey, I need somebody to get us compliant, and that's really what we care about. And then the third one is, I'll change the word a little bit, but really, get us to a mature or advanced state. We find value in this thing and we need somebody to lead the way. Two questions. If you were going to broadly say, generally out of those three categories, the positions that have been out there are 10%, 20%, 50%, whatever those three categories. And then, I'm kind of being self-reflective here on my own personality and the roles that I gravitate to. If you look at all the CISOs, I think you said there was like 16,000 CISOs out there in the market today. Maybe I'm off on that number. You'll tell me. But if you looked at all of those personas of the people, if bucket them, is there 50% change agents maturating people, or really that's like the 5%, 10% rule? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, if we're being honest, like those aren't the only three categories, right? There's another category, which it wasn't my term, but I love it. It's, the golden shovel. It's like the happened and they need to bring in, post-Mandiant Justin to come in and build, so here's the golden shovel for a couple of years.
I haven't been in the golden shovel. I've been on the earlier side.
You've been in the shovel in the back of the head. So
yeah, pretty much. I've been in some of those roles.
Yeah, we all been there. And then there's also like, not to ignore it, but there's, obviously there's portfolio CISOs and field CISOs. And, these are real people and real jobs. I mean, there's so many more nuances than just the ones I mentioned. But I mean, I think it's hard to put a percentage on it because of this reason. And that is because the CISO plays the different roles at any given time in the company's history. And that changes as the company morphs as well. So I can tell you what it is for our CISO. So first of all, the 16,000 number, that's just what we have as far as our database. I don't proclaim that's really mostly Europe and the US, with a little bit of APAC, coming in EMEA, not even all of EMEA, but just mostly Europe. We're still building out those communities, to be honest. So, couldn't even tell you. I'm sure it's 30, 40, 50,000, if someone were to actually do the numbers, but we only have 16,000, in our database that we've met. But on our side, so we only focus on those sort of technology facing, very, very tech forward companies. They could be an AI native startup. They could be, a 5,000 person, SaaS company ready to go public. They could be an enterprise, going through a transformational, program and needing a new version of a CISO. I mean, we did a search for Western Union, last year, the year before. They've been around since the telegraph, but they were modernizing, right? And they were looking for a CISO that had product experience, right? Even as old and, focused as they were, and just a wonderful organization to work with. And they were very open and listening and very interactive with us. And they really wanted to learn about what the modern version was. And so it comes in all sizes and shapes. Of those three categories right now, moving into this year, we're seeing a pretty even split, about a third. We have companies that are, sub 100, sub 50 people, AI native companies that have raised $1 billion, $2 billion. They're pre-revenue, or they're just getting going on their revenue, and security is the one thing that could sink them if they don't have the story. We have the big enterprises, a few of those right now that are looking to transform and looking for that more modern version of a CISO, and potentially even an IT version of that. And then we're also, probably the sweet spot are these AI enabled, but maybe not native SaaS background companies that have really strong momentum, or either in an acquisition spree or about to maybe go public in this market, God forsake. But that's and probably a little bit more emphasis on that last category is what we're seeing. That's kind of the road we sort of built for ourselves. We're not doing a ton with the largest financial services companies in the world, at least not at the CISO level, but maybe the deputy. We're not doing a ton with the smallest companies in the world either. So we're right sort of somewhere in the middle.
So kind of transitioning slightly, or coming off of that, is the past 4 years, and you're going to probably course correct, be more specific, but the security recruiting, hiring, open roles kind of market is shrank quite dramatically post 2020, maybe, for various reasons. One, is that correct? Two, what does it look like today? Is it getting better or holding the course? And then the third question is, considering what you just said of what the roles are out there, where are the companies looking for, what are they looking for? What would be the specific, maybe general guidance to those security leaders on where they need to mature themselves or grow themselves to be more applicable to those roles?
Yeah. I love this question. I love the last question, because it's right what we're seeing right now. As far as the market, the CISO market as an overall general statement, I think that's where you're going with that. Over the last 4 years has been down, and a lot of that is just a rebound from COVID. So the pandemic led to unprecedented growth in both the need for CISOs from a demand perspective, with most companies going from a in-office environment to a remote environment. That was a CISO's problem to solve. It was the CISO's moment in the sun, right? It was not the CIO. Sorry, CIOs, right? You were not able to protect all the applications. You were there to make an availability, and you're amazing at that. But it was the CISO that sort of rose during that time, but it was also the CISO that everyone wanted to be actually human for a moment and hire the right way. And then a couple of years later, we're now looking at consolidations. And so that has really affected, obviously the macroeconomic situation has affected the overall market. But what we have now is we have an enormous amount of postings. And we have a large percentage of companies that are going to go try to do this search on their own. Right. If you think about it, we're only counting, I say we, meaning like me and my colleagues, my competitors, really only account for about maybe 5 or 10%, 15% max of the overall CISO searches that are on the market today. Right. Most of the searches are run by the company themselves, as they should be. Right. They have the tools, the technology, the wherewithal to do it. Well, how they use that tool and technology is just no different than how they use another application. But the most popular search we have right now is called a boomerang, which is like someone we talked to here in January, and then in April they'll come back and be like, we interviewed like 48 candidates and we just can't find the right match. I'm like, hold on there. Like, that's a lot of time to be spending. So how did you get to that point? But there's a lot of, but hey, good for them for at least trying to get it educated. Unfortunately that job search is being talked about on every Slack channel that CISOs talk about. Like, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're looking for. It's maneuver, this and that. And so our job is to make sure we tell that story. But, look, the market's been down. I think we've all been waiting for 2026 to come. I don't think it's going to be a massive increase. I think it's going to be a slow roll. And there's also obviously a lot of geopolitical things going on that affect that. But I do think that it's a good year. Last year was a good year. It wasn't a bad year. It was a much better year than 23, 24. But we were still down, right? And everyone else around us was still down. So as far as the other piece, like what are they looking for? I think the most important piece right now is that if we go back in history of the sort of the shadow IT example I gave, we're going through a rebirth of that right now, which I and other people are calling shadow intelligence, right? It's in 2010, the driver was the CIO was cost containment. And now it's like the catalyst is these engineering teams, these product teams have these finance teams have like instantaneous intelligence. And so they're building shadow intelligence groups that'll get them more productivity. Sales groups are getting more sales velocity. So the shadow engine is now there. It is AWS of 2009, 2010, when I gave you that story, on like major steroids, right? And it's happening in hours, not in weeks or months, right? And so the security fix is, one, IT is not solving this problem. It's a security problem, and it's a specific kind of security problem, someone that's rooted in software technology, right? And someone that understands security engineering and can think and act and talk like a developer. And the outcome has been that this massive market birth of AppSec and ProdSec needs, now AI, shifting from a network problem to a coding problem. And so the where I'm going with this is that the story that the CISO has to be able to tell, the modern CISO, needs to be able to mirror that shadow intelligence solution, right? They need to be extremely well versed in generative and agentic AI, right? They need to understand the scale and the velocity that the cycle of the business is using to put applicable guardrails on without disabling any kind of level of speed, right? It's no longer a slow motion film where we're waiting for licenses to be installed. And it's a supercharged engine where AI coding tools have become like the ultimate engine for architects, developers, and just general users. And so like even using keystrokes is not even like the thing anymore. We're using voice commands to build entire apps, right? So it's like, how are you going to build a guardrail around that, right? And so this instantaneous adoption, where the cloud took years to get developed, and old farts like me are still getting used to how these new companies are being built, right? Intelligence is fast and free. And if a CISO can't tell that story about how they're going to protect the company in that environment, it's going to be a long road. It's going to be a long road.
They completely understand the ability to be knowledgeable and talk about how they're going to deliver on that story. Not deliver on the story, but deliver on the realities, have the story and be able to deliver on it.
Right.
The other aspect is having a conversation on how they're innovating the security function themselves via leveraging AI to solve these labor problems within the teams, get to the scale and speed of what the business needs, reduce those business functions like engineering and others, security, labor, overhead that's being placed on them for more of a streamlined and automation function. That's my premise, that additional story. Are companies looking for that story as well? And, or maybe it's, no, I just really care about delivering on the business versus, delivering on security in a more efficient way.
I think it's both. I think the first part is they have to be able to show that they understand the blocking and tackling that it comes with that. They can run an organization, they can run a budget, they can hire cross-functionally, they can, hire for cross-functional needs. They're not just trying to do it all on their own, that kind of thing. I think there's a lot of initial interview phase that happens there. And then it gets into the nuance of what is the strategy. You hear these interviewers, these interview systems where they do like a homework assignment, right? Or they'll have them come in and do a presentation. Presentations have shifted towards how are you going to protect the company? How are you going to build something we have all this stuff going on around us. How are you going to protect us? Like, what's your plan? How are you going to communicate that plan? How's your team going to communicate that plan? Like, how are you going to embed yourself? And those are kind of the nuances. And I think the problem, by the way, which is not the question you asked, but I'll tell you, the CISOs are really struggling with nuance right now. They're struggling with storytelling. They've actually done the work, which is the frustrating part. But we've had multiple situations just this year alone, the first couple of searches that we saw, where CISOs are not able to understand that a very, very high level question requires a very detailed answer, or they don't ask for clarification. And so they walk away from the interview and the client comes back with the feedback of like, yeah, they really kept things high level. Like, well, what was the question? They're like, what was the weather today? Right. It's a very high level question, but you have to understand the client is not going to tell you, actually, I'm looking for a super detailed answer here. I'm looking for a story. I'm looking for you to shift this question into a story and tell me the beginning, the middle, the end, the result, the ROI, the TCO, whatever it is you need to do. Like, what did I learn? Where did I fail? Like, they want to hear everything. And if you need to ask a couple probing questions to see if that's what they really want, then you should. But a lot of them don't. A lot of them are just answering the question that was given, and it comes across as they're not technical enough, or they're not detailed enough, and so that's really the problem that we're seeing with interview. We have to spend so much time, by the way, both sides. We have to, it's one of the reasons we interview the interviewers. We want to figure out, like, I don't need to know the questions they're going to ask. That we don't over prep candidates. But if I do hear questions that are just like, that's really not going to garner the answer that you're looking for, right, with this kind of candidate. So maybe try that. So we do both. Then we interview, and then we prep the candidates on, okay, let me give you a test drive on the kind of things that are important to them. And if we don't hear the detail level, we're like, okay, let's try that again. It's like, I mean, they got one shot. I'm not in the interviews. I cannot affect, I just can't. And it's easy for me to be an armchair quarterback after they come back and be like, oh, it was great. But that doesn't help anyone, right?
What you're saying resonates quite deeply. And what I heard is, one, hey, go into the interview with these two stories of your background, et cetera. Communicate via stories, communicate in detail, and, the beginning, middle, end, et cetera. But the third thing was probe the interviewer to make sure that that's what they're looking for versus just react and respond. And so I guess my question is, how good are the candidates generally? Insert whatever time window you want, whatever N the sample rate that you want. How good are security people in being interviewed, telling stories? Because some of the things that you brought up was, which I've gotten feedback after some of my interviews that I'm just like, where the hell is this coming from? You're not technical, Justin. I'm like, no one asked me a technical question.
Right. They don't have to. Well, so I think that CISOs in general are fairly strong at interviewing if they're able to understand that there's walking in, that there's going to be a lot of ambiguity. They excel in ambiguity, right? Like that's one of their superpowers. Give them a half answered problem and they'll figure out what the, X, they know X and X, but they don't know Y and Z. Okay. They'll figure it out. Right. Like they're really good at that. When it's very structured and buttoned up and it doesn't really allow them to be themselves and that curiosity superpower doesn't come out, I find that they really struggle. And unfortunately, a lot of interviewers are like that, right? Our interviewees have to deal with the interviewer. But they're really good at telling stories when they're prompted to do so. It's just not a natural thing for them. CISOs don't wake up every day and be like, I got to go interview. I'm going to be really good at this, right? The fact is they've gotten better at it. But I think most of them are pretty good at it in the right settings. So we do a ton of coaching in this area. And it's by the way, there's not 2 stories, there's 6 stories. So I tell every CISO that I talk to, whether they're interviewing with us or they're interviewing through someone, that you have to have 6 stories when you walk into every interview, and you have to have them prepared and probably have multiple examples of each story or multiple versions of story. The stories, if you want to hear them, are 1, I need a story around an incident. It doesn't have to be a breach, but it can be an incident that you were the incident commander, your team was the incident commander. What is the real story and what was your real impact? Where did it start? Where did it end? What did you learn? What was the issue? Was it nation state? Was it, phishing? What was it, right? Walk through maybe a high and a low, something super detrimental versus something that's, day-to-day stuff, right? Yeah. Be able to explain that. What is a story around M&A or high, specifically M&A, but probably high growth? How did you help drive the company through that narrow channel and the jetties on both sides? Like, what was it that you added value? Where did it start? Where was the growth potential that happened while you were there? How did you enable it? did you disable it at all, and what did you learn? The other one's how to work with the product teams and enable the product to, like for AI, for instance, how to enable that guardrails without disabling productivity and velocity. Another one is what have you done specifically on the sales velocity? Every search right now has a field CISO-ish category. It used to be 2%, 3%. Now it's like 10, 15%. Like what are you doing to enable the sales velocity of the company? Is it as simple as you're automating questionnaires with an AI tool, or are you actually getting on the phone with the counterpart and walking them through your entire, SOC report? What is it that you're doing, or more than that? Where have you managed up, and how have you managed up? How have you managed the board, right? Have you managed the audit committee? Where have you presented? How have you presented? Have you not presented yet? How do you want to present? And then how do you build your teams, high and low, right? How do you build technically? That's a really big one. How can you hire someone that's more technical than you, that's smarter than you? How do you manage that person? How do you manage other people's embedded teams that come into your group? There's a lot of dotted line situations in the CISO. So it's not just straightforward all the time. And so those are kind of those are the big ones. I mean, there's other ones that I could throw out there. But those kind of capture, if you can get those in your mind every time you go to an interview, you're probably going to have the arsenal to be able to pull from.
I think that's a great takeaway for every security practitioner in regards to, we're going to go through many interviews in their lives, and the ability to communicate out to a non-security person in an interview in closed time, zero knowledge or limited knowledge on the interviewer, on what am I looking for, et cetera. The ability to tell a story, and in those four or five-ish areas that relate to that business problem and outcome versus a security problem and outcome. I think that's what I heard. That makes a lot of sense to me. Kind of switching just slightly, since we're on giving advice to security people to be better in the hiring process. I know that you've been a big fan or a big promoter of the D&O or the insurance kind of situation today with security leaders in regards to the risk that is really mounting and increasing. What are those additional recommendations or guidance, or, hey, no, don't take a role if this is not there, maybe extreme statements? What's your point of view on those? What are those things?
Yeah, I guess from our perspective, we really don't take on roles where the client isn't serious about indemnifying or offering a D&O situation. It's just not worth it right now. There's a lot of focus on companies wanting to, this is what I was talking about. We'll run, I think we ran 26 or so last year. But we talk to 150 or so companies a year. So like, we're not losing 120 deals, right? We're turning down a lot of them, and, or it's just not the right match, or they're going to go do it on their own, right? But the ones where we actually can talk through and be like, look, we're close here, but we need to make sure that you're serious, because every single one of our candidates, we're going to advocate for them. It's as important as the comp. It's actually part of the comp. So like, we're not even going to get down to the conversation of, is this a $700,000 candidate or a $2 million candidate? The question is, are you going to be able to protect them when the going gets rough? Just had a situation where a candidate asked that. I was helping someone, it wasn't a search of ours, and they got just berated by the executive team, right? And they're like, they kind of cut the whole conversation off. We don't do that with this level. This is not, you just told me everything I need to know, right? Basically just dodged a bullet there, because you weren't ready to put your focus there. You talk a big game during the interview, and look, I get it. It's a business decision, but this doesn't cost them anything. It's a contract, right? And what I always say, the advice that I give to CISOs is get the same deal as the CFO. And Joe Sullivan and I talk about this a lot, and he says the same thing. It's like, I want the same deal as the CFO, right? You can even make more than the CFO, by the way. It doesn't have to be money-wise. I'm just talking about the same level of protection. So that's one thing that we do recommend. And look, if there's an intent as to why they don't do it, and they can walk us through it, then I'll go explain that logic to the candidate, as long as it does make sense. And I don't think that they are just pushing it off because they don't want to change their leveling, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is just really protect yourself from a window perspective. This is a really hard time to find a job as a CISO, even the really good ones. It takes a long time. The processes aren't, super defined. And so, they make sure you have some sort of runway. Make sure you build that in. Hey, if going gets rough, I need to see 6 months of payment here. Way too many situations where CISOs put in 3-4 years and they were getting 4 months of time. I mean, they put their heart and soul into the stuff. You don't treat your CFO or your VP of sales like that. You give them a severance. And so that's a pretty easy thing to commit to up front. If you don't want to do it up front, then maybe get a bonus up front and it could be carved back. But something that protects you, that you can put something in your reserves. And there's a bunch of other smaller things, but I think that's really, getting to see a SOC report before you join, getting to see, now the ISO 4100, right? Get to see that before you join, right? Like a lot of transparency things that companies could be doing. And CISOs are going to be much more diligent about this. So
you do more than just help out putting positions in for CISOs to security roles. You focus on a couple of other things as well, like go-to-market roles, and the categories of clients that you have. I think you mentioned a little bit earlier, you don't focus on the Fortune 100 large CFOs. It's really companies underneath them is your sweet spot. Maybe talk about that a little bit, and any color on those go-to-market roles or things that you're seeing that are interesting.
Us managing go-to-market roles?
Yeah,
we really don't do it. I mean, we really try to stick to CISO, deputy CISO, we do CIO roles, a couple of them a year at least. But it's our main focus. We help a lot of companies with their go-to-market strategy, but it's really under the how does the CISO do that, right? And we help a lot of boards, but we don't actually.
A different question is, you talk about the field CISO roles. Maybe that's a more helpful kind of conversation points. What's your point of view on the field CISO roles? And is this something that security leaders really want to do? Is it a bait and switch sometimes where, hey, you're coming in for role X and ended up being role Y? What are we seeing in that space?
Yeah, my view has changed on this over time. I used to think the field CISO was like basically just, there's one version of it, and it was just basically a glorified salesperson. And that's not untrue in some of these, it's typically a smaller, product security company that is trying to get some market share, and it's not a terrible idea, right? Go get someone. But what I find is that those CISOs are typically not at the, apex of their career. They're usually, looking for something that's a little bit more diverse, and maybe they're slowing down, or maybe they want to be more strategic and they're kind of done with the operational side of the CISO. Again, nothing wrong with that. That's, everyone's got their thing. But even the definition of a field CISO, and just to put it out there, we really don't run those searches. We've done a couple searches for product security companies, but the version that we see is this true advisor to the CEO and to the board. We did one last year, which was a CISO that reported to the CEO, and everywhere the CEO went, the CISO went, and was basically like, this is what our product does. And so it was not, it was sales-ish, but it wasn't like, he wasn't tied to the CRO. There was no number tied to them. They were basically securing the sales and business velocity of the company by being an advisor to the CEO and to the board and to the product team, and bringing that information back. But that's a very small percentage of field CISOs, so to speak. Most of them are still, I think we're seeing a metamorphosis of that. And, a lot of field, and the biggest problem with field CISO right now is that people take that to build an additional muscle of sales so they can round that out. And then they realize, ooh, this isn't so fun, or this is really hard, or my network ran out of juice. And then they get out of line and they come back in the operational line, and I'm the bad guy that has to say, hey, the line's a lot longer now because of the market conditions. And that's hard. That's really hard. Yeah.
So, what's the one thing you want the security practitioner listening to take away? What's the one message you would say if there was a succinct pitch? Hey, participate in the The survey? Maybe something else? I don't know.
No, we're so thankful for everyone that we have. I think we had over 700 participants this year. So that was the biggest we've ever had. Yeah. So yes, but that is true. It doesn't, two things. I'd say two things. One, get involved in your community, right? Statistically, your community is the one that's going to help you find your next role. It's not us statistically. It doesn't mean I'm not here to help you, but I get, dozens of calls a week saying, hey, I'm on the market. Can you help me? And I'm like, I'm definitely happy to help, but understand that our volume is very small. It's always small. Like we're not trying to be something we're not. And then, and so find your own community, find your own tribe, so to speak, and make sure that you're sharing your experiences with them. You're listening to others. You're helping others. There's no other place in the world is there a market or an industry where people share as much against potentially a common enemy. The CISO community is super unique in that sense. I thought I saw a lot of that in the CIO community. They're pretty close. The CISO community is totally different. And they need to continue to do that, right? There's a risk right now that they're not talking to one another because they're so busy. We do these sanctuary dinners to try to pull people together and actually meet with each other face to face, right? It's almost like there's another pandemic going on. It's hard to get together, right? So I think the last thing, and probably the more important one, is work on your stories. Your storytelling. If CISOs could benefit from learning their stories, it will definitely come back in a positive manner. If you don't get your stories, the same thing happens. As the same negative things could happen. If you're not interested in telling stories, you're probably going to run into some challenges. So
yeah, Michael, hey, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. If people wanted to get in touch with you or grab that survey, when's the results? When's it coming out? Where do they go? And how do they connect in with you guys?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the survey is coming out February 10th, February 9th, is whatever that Tuesday is of the second week of February. And it's generally available to everyone. We put it on our website. And it's really meant as a tool. So please use it. I think we had over 250 people. We tracked it last year that used it those are just people that told us about it. Independent people may have used it on their own and not told us. That's fine. Great. So there's that. As far as getting in touch with us, probably the best way is LinkedIn. I will warn you in advance, I'm pretty terrible on LinkedIn. I have, as of this morning, I have about 85 unread messages, and I have over 200 unread connection requests. But that's not to say that I don't want to hear from you. It's just really hard to get through. I'm sure no other recruiters in any other different situation. We just get pounded. So.
And that website is hitchpartners.com.
It is.
Perfect. Michael, always a pleasure. Seriously. And so, listeners, get those stories straight, do your research, work them, practice them. Coming from an expert, Michael, it resonates, and in my own personal experience, it holds a lot of water. So, definitely recommend it even myself.
Yeah, next time we ever do this, I'm happy to talk about some of the interviewing tactics there, guys. One thing we didn't cover, but happy to cover that at some point. What do you do about getting ghosted? What do you do about preparing? There's a lot of CISOs that are on the market right now don't, go about it wrong. They've never been taught, right? If you're a CISO in this market, you probably haven't had an interview for a long, long time, and the world is very different. Yep. So, happy to cover that. That's just more of a conversation. So.
Will do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks.